All right, welcome back to first set of readings for ecology. This will be chapter 4 out of Miller-Spoolman. Quick follow-up to chapter 3, clearly. Chapter 4, rather, is looking at biodiversity and evolution. So, in a way, it's continuing what we were talking about with cycling and interactions between organisms, but now we're looking more specifically at the organismal side of things rather than a broader look at sort of some of the abiotic factors within these ecosystems. So biodiversity is an important concept when we're talking about sustainability because biodiversity lends this stability and resilience to these ecological systems in that if a species goes extinct, if there's a similar species and similar niche to refill those roles, or if there's a lot of diversity, species would be less apt to go extinct. These systems are more resilient to the environmental changes that we often see as a result of natural processes, but we see more as a result of human processes interacting with natural processes. Biodiversity can have a lot of different sorts of takes on what we mean by biodiversity. We can talk about diversity within a species itself. We can talk about many different species within a habitat type, or we can even talk about biodiversity in a habitat type, or a diversity of habitat types, where we have many different habitats that, that diversity, again, ensures that systems have this resiliency built in. Within ecosystems, species play different roles, and their niche is really what helps sort of define what their role within the ecosystem is. So if in the book as we look at two different creatures, we have raccoons and pandas. They have very different sorts of niches. Raccoons are happy to eat pretty much anything and live pretty much anywhere, so they have a really broad niche. Pandas, however, are restricted to areas where they can consume bamboo, so they have a very, very narrow niche. And there's some overlap between them, but different species are going to interact with their habitats differently based on their niche. We can talk about whether species are native or non-native or invasive species. Native species generally are species that are in a place and have evolved in place for thousands of years in coordination with other species in the area. We can have non-native species that aren't necessarily invasive, and this really just sort of definitionally species that came from a different place but are not, they're sort of adding to the biodiversity, but they're not causing any ecological problems. The biggest issue often we see with non-native species in areas is that oftentimes that they become invasive, and when species become invasive, that means they generally take over an area. Invasive species that we have, some sort of big ones around here would be, say, zebra mussels in the Mississippi River, where they've come from Eastern Europe, and they've been released from any predator pressure, and so they really are unfettered to grow into as many, as much as they can without these sort of natural checks and balances that sort of stably functioning ecosystems mostly have. There's many examples of invasive species. Reed canary grass, for example, is a grass species that takes over wetland and ditch habitats. With lots of different possibilities for that. We can also have indicator species, which really play this role in sort of allowing researchers or scientists to provide warning of changes in the environment. So species that are sensitive are going to change faster or respond faster to changes in their environment than species that are less sensitive. We can also have keystone species, and keystone species really are these species that play this big role in shaping what ecosystems look like. Examples of keystone species in the book here are American alligators. They're more than just hungry mouths. They also change their environments when they build nests and when they move through the habitat. And so they have this building sort of role. Sharks are another keystone species. They're an apex predator, and they really keep prey populations in check. But there are also other keystone species. Oysters, for example, filter a lot of water and oftentimes provide physical structure for other organisms to interact with. So keystone species, there's many types of keystone species, but one thing they do have in common is that they all share this very strong role in shaping what ecosystems look like. how species react to their changing environments is going to depend a lot on sort of their evolutionary history. Are species able to adapt and change, or has something in their past made, for example, a very small population with a small gene pool, that means that they have fewer traits to pull on, and so they go extinct because they cannot react to a changing environment. Extinction is a natural process. Every species that's no longer alive today is definitionally extinct, and eventually the species that are alive today will eventually become extinct. I think when people talk about extinction in a sort of modern sense of the world, we're talking about these unnatural sort of human-driven extinction events that are preventable in the sense that we as humans are altering our landscapes and driving these extinctions. If we changed our behavior, we could stave off those extinction events for the most part. And that when conversations about extinction often revolve around that, but species' ability to adapt and change to these changing environments is part of the evolutionary process. I think this sort of outsized and completely unnecessary role that humans play is often the biggest critique of it. If we look at figure 4.11 in the textbook, it gives this timeline with these different, you can see this diversity measures sort of expanding and contracting over time where we have these extinction events. We are currently in the middle of an extinction event at one of these sort of global extinction events. And so, in the future, this time period will be seen as a time where we did lose a great many of species, and so we do as humans have a responsibility on this planet because we are driving that extinction event. That pretty much finishes up chapter 4. We'll be moving on to the other chapters within the ecosystem unit. Again, please check your syllabus for your reading assignments and other materials. Thank you.